Welcome to this episode of Abnormal Psych Through Film. My name is John Martin. I'm a clinical social worker and also an addictions counselor and owner of Autumn's Harbor Psychotherapy. And this week, I'm going to talk to you about one of my favorite films. I realize I say that every week, but this truly has been at the top of my list, top 5 films, and that's Garden State. Garden State was released in 2004. It was an indie film that was written, directed, and starring Zach Braff, who you might know from the show Scrubs. And it was his directorial debut, and the whole film was shot in 25 days and had a $2.5 million budget. And it ended up grossing over $35 million and was a cult classic film. And I'm going to talk about the film in the context of a number of themes, kind of psychological themes, but also major depressive disorder. And so the film starts with this scene. The film is full of these scenes that I don't even know how to describe. They're quirky, they're poignant, they're visually stunning, they are emotionally laden. It's really a brilliant aspect of the film. So the opening scene is kind of a vision or a dream from Zach's character, Andrew Largeman. And he's in a plane that's crashing, and everybody in the plane is freaking out, as you can imagine. And the plane is, rocketing towards the earth. And he's just sitting there, totally flat, totally unaffected. And at one point, he reaches up to adjust his air conditioning. And it sets the tone for this character in his life of just being numb. He's been numbed for decades. We don't know why yet. But he comes to and he receives a call from his father that his mother has passed away. We learn that his mother was a paraplegic. We don't know yet how that happened, but she has passed away, and now Andrew is to return home, a place that he hasn't been in almost a decade. And so he goes home and he attends the funeral. And it's a sad thing. There's, of course, themes of loss and grief in the film, certainly regret. It also puts on display his relationship with his father, which is very tense. His father's a psychiatrist who we learn has been prescribing Andrew lots and lots of psychiatric medications under the guise of wanting him to be happy, but essentially it's just numbed him. And so around this time, Andrew decides he's going to stop taking the medicine. And so he stops taking the medicine, and when he's at the funeral, he hooks up with an old friend of his named Mark. And Mark is a central piece in this film, masterfully played by Sarsgaard. I'll have to go back and look at his name, but it's a fabulous portrayal of this character, Mark. And he's a grave digger. It's probably not the appropriate term, but he's a grave digger. And he meets back up with Andrew, and they end up reestablishing a connection that is beautifully done in the film. At times it's uncomfortable, at times it's edgy, but towards the end of the film, there's a gesture that Mark does for Andrew. It's really sweet. And so at the funeral, Mark asks Andrew if he wants to attend a party for a mutual friend of theirs named Jesse, who became rich from patenting silent Velcro. It's just one of these kind of quirky things in the film, right? This guy who's now in this mansion, living the life from Silent Velcro. And so he goes to the party, and everybody thinks he's this movie star when he's not. But he kind of plays along with it. And there's a great scene where he takes ecstasy and he plays Spin the Bottle. And there's a woman who he kind of connects with, and he ends up kissing her. And it's kind of a moment where you see some joy come to Andrew, although it's synthetic. So he then wakes up the next day in Mark's house, and he has penises and obscene things written on his face and all over his body, and he doesn't know that that's the case. But there's another interesting scene with Mark's mom, and she's in a relationship with a guy who is the same age as Mark, and Mark is hostile towards him. And he's a knight at medieval times, one of those restaurants. It's just this incredible scene. He speaks Klingon. It's unbelievable. And at one point, Mark says something to the effect of, "Get out of my house or I'm going to chop your effing head off." It's just this is a powerful scene. It's just kind of whoa. And so then Andrew goes to the doctor. He had asked his father for a referral to see a neurologist because he'd been having headaches, probably from the withdrawal from the psychiatric medications. And that's where he meets Sam, played by Natalie Portman, who does a masterful portrayal of this character. Sam is a quirky, eccentric, fun-loving, outgoing, free-spirited character who is drawn to Andrew immediately. And they end up establishing a connection, and we find out that Sam is at the doctor's office because she has epilepsy, so she suffers from seizures. And they end up connecting. He drives her home, and he meets her family. And it really kind of represents everything that he didn't have, right? You don't meet the father, you just meet the mother. She's very warm. It's a very loving environment. And it's kind of clear that Andrew has this fondness for Sam and for her family because it was all the things that he didn't have. And so it's very well done by Natalie Portman. She just does an excellent job. So fast forward a bit, and they are back at Jesse's house in front of a fireplace, Andrew and Sam. And they have a moment where we find out what happened to Andrew's mother. And it comes out that when Andrew was 9 years old, he pushed her and she fell back onto the dishwasher that had a faulty door and struck her head or neck in such a way that she became paralyzed. And he confides in Sam that his mother was very depressed during his childhood, and he hated her for that. And so that's why he pushed her. And of course, it was, a 9-year-old acting out his feelings in a pretty relatively appropriate way, but it had dire consequences. And this kind of set the tone for his relationship with his father deteriorating, ultimately him being put on medications for his anger problems, sent to boarding school, and then ultimately leaving home. And so when we learn that, it's Andrew's kind of being vulnerable and connecting with Sam as they grow more and more intimate with each other. So then there's the quarry scene, and this is actually the image that's on the cover of the movie poster, and it's Mark, Andrew, and Sam standing on top of a bulldozer in garbage bags in the pouring rain, screaming into the abyss, if you will, that it's the quarry. And they're there to meet up with a couple who's living in a trailer or an old boat. I think it's an old boat. And Sam and Andrew don't know why they're there, but Mark is there to get a necklace that was Andrew's deceased mother's necklace. So this is the sweet gesture that I referred to earlier, where Mark is really a good guy who wants wants Andrew to be happy and is a good friend to him. So this is a symbolic moment because one of the themes in the film is kind of like actualization, but also kind of turning inward and confronting yourself, things about yourself that might be displeasing or unacceptable to you, things that are suppressed, repressed, and having the courage to face those difficult and painful things. And this being a necessary step in the process of individuation and actualization. And this is what Andrew's been missing. He's been missing facing his feelings, facing his anger, facing his regret, taking responsibility, but also kind of changing the way that he looks at it. At the end of the film, he has kind of redemption with his father, and he expresses to him how he doesn't blame himself anymore. He recognizes that he was a kid and that it was an accident and that he's not a bad person because of it. And it kind of sets him free. And I don't think he would have had that change in his mindset unless he had confronted his feelings. So it was almost like he was imprisoned by his own avoidance of feeling. And this is a part of mental illness, especially depression. This inability to process feelings. Actually, neurologically, the prefrontal cortex is disconnected from the limbic system, which is our emotional brain. And so there's that inability to regulate emotion and an inability to reprocess thoughts and beliefs around experiences in our life. And so this is a big piece of Andrew's journey. So we come to the climax of the film. And so at this point, if you haven't already gathered, Sam and Andrew have fallen in love. And it's a beautiful love story. That's a huge theme in the film of connection and love and being together. And so at the end of the film, Andrew is getting on an airplane to go back to Los Angeles to find himself. And he is talking with Sam, who's very emotional and crying and desperate for him to stay. And he loves her and he wants to be with her. But he also recognizes that if he wants to have a successful, healthy relationship with Sam, he's got to make sure he's okay, and that he's still got some work to do. So he gets on the airplane, and then the very last scene, he comes out of the airplane and he approaches Sam, and he decides to stay. The music in this film is so incredible. This final scene, there's a song by I don't know how to pronounce it. Frau, I think is how it's spelled. But the song it just kind of elevates the emotional experience of the scene. And there are many points in the film where this happens. In fact, the band The Shins, their career was kind of launched by this film because the music is just awesome. And so the film ends with them connecting, and of course, this is the happy ending that we would hope for. And so that's kind of the synopsis of the film. And the psychiatric disorder that really comes to the forefront is major depressive disorder. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what is major depressive disorder and how do we treat it. Okay, so major depressive disorder is characterized by a depressed mood. So when I think of mood disorders, I try to keep it simple. I have a tendency to overcomplicate things, but I kind of think of up, down, and neutral, right? So mentioned before, this idea of being up, we use the term mania, right? It's elevated, it's fast, it's sometimes psychotic, out of contact with reality. It's a very activated state that's abnormal. Then you have low, right? So this would be the depressed state, which is kind of a mirror image or a opposing image of mania, where you have low mood, which can manifest in different ways. So for a lot of people, there's what we call anhedonia, which is lack of interest, loss of pleasure, the inability to find joy in things that once were very satisfying and pleasurable. So this is a big piece of depression. There are other symptoms that we look for, and these typically take place in a 2-week period. This is kind of the requirement to have a depressive episode. And so these are things like sleep changes. And what's interesting about this is you can have hypersomnia, which is being overly tired, or you can have insomnia, which is the inability to sleep. It's kind of like, okay, that's interesting dichotomy there. And it's the same thing with appetite changes. You can have overeating or you can have undereating. And again, this interesting dichotomy. So people just kind of experience it differently. You tend to also have hopelessness, worthlessness, right? Beliefs about the self that you're not good enough, a lot of shame, difficulty concentrating, suicidality. So oftentimes feelings of wanting to die, sometimes passive. Passive suicidality is kind of these thoughts, often fleeting, of I wish I were never born, or things would be easier if I weren't here. But they lack a plan and they lack an intent. So this differentiates passive suicidality from active suicidality, which is I have a method in mind, I intend to do it, right? And I have a plan. And so active suicidality is something that as a therapist, we are mandated to report and to intervene, because this is obviously a crisis situation. So unfortunately, a lot of people with major depressive disorder experience suicidal thoughts. You also have psychomotor changes. Again, dichotomy. Sometimes you can have what we call psychomotor retardation, which is kind of a slowing down of movements and just kind of being very still or lifeless. And then you have psychomotor agitation, where it's restlessness, difficulty sitting still, these kinds of things. And so these kind of are the hallmark symptoms of major depressive disorder. And so Andrew really embodies many of these. We don't see all of them, but we definitely see the anhedonia early on, right? The scene of him in the airplane just kind of flat, numb, right? This kind of loss of pleasure, loss of joy, right? Just really being kind of disconnected from life and disconnected from himself. We definitely see guilt, right? Guilt over, certainly guilt over his role in his mother's injury, but I think there's also an implied guilt around leaving home and kind of not being, not continuing to maintain relationships with his father or his friends, people in his community. So there's certainly some guilt there. We don't see a lot of things like suicidality or necessarily fatigue or hypersomnia or appetite changes, but we do see some of the classic kind of numb, disconnected kinds of symptoms. There's also a scene where you kind of see the poor concentration when he drives off with the gas in the tank. This is a kind of a funny scene, but he's kind of just out of it. He's not present, and so this is kind of the portrayal of this character that I think would fit well with the diagnosis of major depressive disorder. So finally, how do we treat major depressive disorder? And this can be challenging because a lot of the treatments require certain changes in behavior, we call behavioral activation, that is difficult for people who are depressed. Right? There's a lack of motivation. There's an inertia where they have difficulty doing things, starting movement even. And so it's kind of a cruel reality of depression where the very thing that could help someone is the thing that they struggle most to do. And so psychotherapy is going to be a big piece. Cognitive behavior therapy, and specifically behavior activation. Behavior activation is essentially finding what a person's values are so that you can tap into the motivation and put together kind of a system of rewards so that the person is reinforcing behavior change, right? That is going to be helpful in treating their depression. Sometimes you got to start really small. Little wins, goal setting that is specific, attainable, measurable. And you don't want to set people up for failure. You want to instill the sense of efficacy that I can do this, I can get better. So sometimes it's little things like going for a walk once a week for 15 minutes or sending a text message to a friend. These little things that you can build on and create some momentum. And with cognitive behavior therapy in general, essentially what you're doing is you are providing a set of skills for the person to be able to process things differently and to identify what we call cognitive distortions or maladaptive beliefs, right? And these are thoughts about the self that aren't true. They're skewed towards the negative. And helping a person learn how to confront those thoughts, right? And hold them up against reality, some reality testing, and hopefully find a different way to think about things. And we know that if you change a thought, that's going to affect the feeling, right? And so you also draw that connection to a new thought. How does that affect the emotion, right? And then that's going to ultimately affect behavior. And then behavior is going to affect the outcome. And so it's this kind of process of, changing things upstream so that they ultimately trickle down to having an impact on an emotional and a behavioral level. And so this is an important piece of psychotherapy. There are other modalities, but this is kind of one of the main evidence-based practices. Another major component for many people is pharmacotherapy. So the utilization of medications, ideally in concert with psychotherapy. This is going to maximize the therapeutic effect of both therapy and medications is when you bring them both together. And so typical medications that are used for depression are SSRIs, or selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So serotonin is a neurotransmitter, a chemical messenger in the brain that's thought to play a major role in mood. And so by blocking serotonin from going back upstream, you're actually increasing the level of serotonin in the brain at the level of the receptor. And so this tends to have an uplifting effect. We've seen its ability to improve communication between the frontal lobe and deeper parts of the limbic system, so that again, you increase emotional regulation, you also increase the ability to reprocess thoughts and memories. And so this can be a very helpful thing. It's not effective for everybody. I've seen studies anywhere from 30 to 50% effectiveness of the SSRIs. There are other medications that are used, SNRIs, which is serotonin and norepinephrine. So these are kind of a little more activating. Norepinephrine is more of an activating neurotransmitter. And so for people who may be more unmotivated or really low mood, this might be something that can provide some activation. And generally if these medications are unsuccessful, they will sometimes do what's called augmentation therapy. So they may add a medication like an atypical antipsychotic, which why would you give an antipsychotic for depression? But what we're seeing with these medications, such as Abilify and Latuda, they are effective at raising mood, right? They act on similar neurotransmitters, dopamine, serotonin, that seem to have a positive effect on mood and seem to work well with the SSRIs. So they kind of complement those medications. Sometimes you'll see mood stabilizers, lithium, lamictal, that might also help if people are having a lot of shifts. Cycling is a part of depression, not just bipolar disorder, but people, tend to kind of waver in their mood. And so those medications are also used sometimes. For some people, unfortunately, they do not respond to these medications or multiple trials of medications, and we call this treatment-resistant depression. And so the protocol for treatment-resistant depression is often something called neurostimulation. So neurostimulation, there's fundamentally two kinds. One is called TMS, which is transcranial magnetic stimulation, which is a slightly less invasive neurostimulation technique where they actually use magnets that are placed on the skull to effectively increase neural activity, right? So one of the things we know with depression is there's a decrease in neural activity. The connections in the brain have kind of withered. And so the neurostimulation kind of puffs up those connections, the dendrites and the synapses. It kind of brings it back to life and encourages the flow of these feel-good neurotransmitters, if you will, serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine. And so it can be really effective and fast at boosting mood for someone. The final technique for neurostimulation is called ECT, electroconvulsive therapy, which studies indicate it's slightly more effective than TMS, but it's also pretty, I say invasive in the sense that a person has to be put to sleep. So it's done in a hospital setting, and they are essentially inducing a seizure, a controlled seizure in a person. But anywhere from 70 to 80% effectiveness with ECT. You couple that with psychotherapy, medications, and it can even have a greater effect. So it can be really helpful for some people. For some people, it is a miraculous change that they have sought for many years. And so those are the neurostimulation options. And then finally, I think it's important to address lifestyle changes, things like diet, sleep, exercise, sunlight, making sure that they are doing the basic things to kind of lay the foundation for all of these other things to work best. And so this is an important thing that I will talk about with clients is, what are you eating? Let's talk about ways to maximize your metabolic health. Let's look at exercise. Exercise has been shown to be as effective as SSRIs at treating depression. And so getting a person active, but again, you're faced with the challenge of, depression makes a person not want to move. And so getting a person to move can be challenging. And finally, I'll mention kind of an up and coming field or area of study. I'm not sure if that's correct terminology, but psychedelic assisted therapy. And so there are numerous trials happening in the United States looking at psilocybin, MDMA as potential treatments for depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, etc. And so you hear anecdotal evidence of really positive outcomes with these psychedelic medications, but of course they come with risk, they come with side effects, and some of the most recent studies show that they don't outperform traditional treatments such as SSRIs for depression. And so something to be mindful of, to kind of look out for as a potential, but right now we still need a lot more evidence. Ketamine is actually currently FDA approved to treat major depressive disorder and treatment-resistant depression. So this is happening currently and might be a helpful avenue for some people. And so yeah, that's it. That's major depressive disorder, kind of what it is, some of the treatments, and the movie, again, Garden State, highly recommend it. I think it's a beautifully done film. It's very unique. It's great, very, very enjoyable. So I hope that you get a chance to see it if you haven't already. And thank you for joining. Keep your minds open and your screens lit.